And this Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
Tonight we're going to talk about Survivor Kaoh Rong Episode 8. On time, once again, as promised.
Yes. And they actually voted someone out.
Yeah. And there were some interesting things that happened along the way.
It was a fun episode.
Yeah, I thought so. I guess we can. I was gonna just launch us right into the chronological, but then I remembered we had a YouTube comment on the video version of the last episode. Let's see if I can actually find it. There we go. From the whatever 2025 says, "Nice talk as always. Looking forward to what you have to say about this week's episode. I enjoyed it a lot. What do you think about Sydney's position right now? Have a great day. Smiley face." So we'll certainly talk about Sydney's position as we move forward. But thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Certainly Sydney made a big decision in this episode. And we'll, I think, be looking for the building blocks of that as we proceed through here.
Yes, and I'm already going to pre-warn you. I don't want this to sound like I'm hedging, but I really think that Sydney's decision could go very much in two different ways, depending on how she plays it from this point on.
Mm-hmm.
I think she has set herself up where she could do things very well or very poorly, all based on how she acts from this point forward.
Agreed.
And I'm not really, and I know it sounds like hedging, but I truly believe that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I know you could say that about any decision, I'm
going to flip this coin, and it's either going to be heads or it's going to be tails. But no, at the same time, I definitely know what you mean in the sense that rather than just be passive, she has chosen to make a big decision and change the path that she's taking through the game. Now, there's a lot of game left, so one big move does not get you all the way to the end. So she has a long way to go still, but she has made a strong entry into being one of the proactive players who's making moves the way you have to if you hope to be the winner at the end.
Right. And that's why I say that, because yes, you could say the same words could be said had she chose to just go along with the plan. You could say, well, Sydney's decision to go along with the plan will all be determined by how she plays on here. And so that's why it sounds weird saying that to me, but it is really how I feel. I think that she didn't just flip a coin.
Right.
She went and got a coin. She didn't have a coin. She went and got one. And so the act of actually going to get a coin to be able to flip, I thought was awesome. But if heads is good and tails is bad, she's kind of in that position. And we'll talk about which things could go well for her and where she's kind of set up right, and which things poorly and where she might not be set up as well as we get through it. So
I was happy, though, feeling a little bit like even though towards the beginning of this episode, and we'll talk about it, I think that she kind of reacted to the wrong thing in a situation early on. But ultimately she kind of pulled out of that direction, and I was kind of happy to see her sort of step forward. She's been playing lower key when it suited her, and she's now recognized that the time has come to change that.
Right. And what she also didn't do that I liked is she didn't just sit in a corner and bitch.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't like the way something was going. She saw an opportunity that, like we talk about, the best strategy is when what you want to do aligns with what you should do. She saw that those things could come together, where what she wanted could also be good for her. And put them together. And that's why I'm glad that she did make the choice, you know, and like I said, I think it was a great, that's probably the best way to say it. I think it was a great decision for Sydney to make this move and execute it. Whether or not it truly helps her in the game, that's the part that's to be determined, I guess.
Yeah. I agree. But so let's talk through this from the beginning. I think we start right off with Scott's previously on Survivor. It's okay to be happy and sad at the same time. Which
it was a good impression.
Yeah, it was, and it was certainly funny. Although my immediate thought was, you know, some of the people standing right there with you are kind of just sad. So, yeah. And then especially like they're all still standing around, and he goes into the Forrest Gump impression too, and it's like, yeah, okay, all right, maybe that's you know. You share that one with Jason later. While everyone's standing right there, maybe.
Well, and that's what we've learned, that you talk about the building blocks. Like this was a very small window into how he and Jason have sort of they're misinterpreting how other people feel about their position. Like they think everybody thinks like they do. You know, they've really gotten into this. And this was a great example of that, of like, oh, because I feel like that and Jason feels like that, everybody probably feels like that, so I can make this joke. When really, like you said, half the people, that joke falls flat because it doesn't pertain to them. And then their play throughout the rest of this episode, while not incorrect play, what the problem was is that they didn't think how other people would feel. It goes back to that game theory of realize that like other people can do stuff too. Just because you have a great idea, they made this presumption that everybody was just thinking like they did, and this is a great thing. Like, we're 7 people, we don't have to worry about it. Like, how great is that? Okay, we're done. You know, not thinking, but what if, you know, there was, I mean, Nick was probably the only one who was actually thinking that way of sort of that core group. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I actually kind of came around to liking Nick a little bit by the end of this one. It wasn't a dramatic reversal of who I thought he was before, but I saw more positive elements to him this time.
Yeah.
You know,
just it was,
go home.
I agree with you. At the end of the episode, he was still the same person that we thought he was before. We just, you know, he went from kind of like, you know, if this is sort of neutral to someone, he's sort of below neutral in that kind of, yeah, run me the wrong way, to kind of moving a little bit above. Like, yeah.
Well, and the one of the funny things just on that is in his Ponderosa video, at one point he gets into a hair-splitting conversation with Neil about the difference between being egotistical and being narcissistic.
Between the two of them, that sounds like an amazing conversation.
Well, there wasn't a whole lot to it in the video, but I was just amused by the exchange.
That's funny.
Yeah. Update, just by the way, because it doesn't really come up in this episode. Well, I guess maybe Aubrey mentions it a little bit. I mentioned last episode that I was going to do my homework and watch Neil's Ponderosa video to see if he talks about the idol.
Right.
And he does, but there's no discussion of like a decision-making process about hanging on to it. It's clear ultimately that he wanted it as a keepsake, and so he decided to keep it. But the way he talks about it, it's like he never considered doing anything else with it. It's like, it's his, so he's going to keep it. Period. And there may be an aspect, too, of, you know, he's so emotional at getting pulled from the game when he doesn't want to, that this idea that he wants to hold on to something, You know, he feels like the game's being pulled away from him, but at least he can keep this, that sort of thing. But it's certainly, you know, there's an aspect to it which is pretty selfish, given that like it would only be a keepsake for him now, whereas it could actually do someone else good in the game.
Right.
But so there's really no discussion of it like a decision-making process, but he does talk about imagining being 80 years old and looking at this little keepsake to remember these crazy 19 days. Yeah, it's another thing that was just interesting about the 2 Ponderosa videos is that because Neil actually went to stay at a hospital briefly before going to the Ponderosa camp proper, Nick actually was the first one to arrive at the real Ponderosa, and then Neil joined him afterward.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just because Neil spent a couple of days, getting antibiotics and so on. Okay, so anyway, that was an update on answering that question. Why did Neil not give the idol to anybody else? But it sounds like he didn't want to, which I suppose is right.
It is his prerogative, as they say.
Well, it's also true that, like, for example, Aubrey may have been his best ally in the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he feels like he owes her anything.
Right.
Anyway, so we have everybody there at the camp. Some of them are happy and sad about Neil. Some of them are just sad. We've got the Brains as the outliers against the alliance of the Bronze and the Beauties. So it's a 7-3 alliance. The plan is pretty straightforward. They're going to get rid of the 3 Brain members, Joe, Aubrey, and Debbie. They have enough numbers that they can split the votes against an idol play every time. Which, you know, that's a rough spot to be in for Joe, Debbie, and Aubrey. But, it seems like everybody, like Joe doesn't talk about stuff very much to the camera. Maybe he's just not very vocal about these things. But to be sure, it's kind of nice to see Aubrey and Debbie both, kind of not willing to give up. Aubrey continues Jason's high school discussion from last week. In terms of he was the one that said, we're just stuffing nerds in lockers, and so she's trying to turn it around in a Revenge of the Nerds sort of way. But at the same time, it's at this point in the episode, it really is not obvious what, if anything, they're going to be able to take advantage of. Although it's also true, and as we saw demonstrated in this episode, that it is sometimes when you have the numbers in such a dominant position that is actually when splintering happens, because there is an element where some people become so overconfident that they're not paying attention, and other people start saying, hey, the way the numbers are, if I try to go do this over here, I could just turn the whole thing around. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened, of course.
Yes, and I loved, by the way, the bold move of not worrying about whether Nick had an idol.
Mm-hmm.
I like that when that happens. Like, people mess around with this whole splitting votes thing so much,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's better just to go, you know what, vote for who we want, and that way, in case it makes it harder to splinter.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? If they have an idol, good for them. And that sucks for one of us.
Even if they do have an idol, it's not necessarily a guarantee that they'll play it.
Right.
If you're trying to blindside someone, then maybe they do have an idol, and so what? They'll go home with it in their pocket.
Exactly. So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, splitting votes thing. I would be interested to go back and see like how many times that's actually worked.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it has happened. I feel like I remember some times when it's happened.
Yeah. Well,
But
there have certainly been plenty of times where votes were not split and an idle play screwed up the plans of the majority. That, that has certainly happened before. But it's also true that on a couple of seasons, especially the more recent seasons, everyone is so conservative around the idols that it does seem like a plan to split the votes goes awry because you are diluting your numbers that way.
Right.
And especially in cases where we know that there is no idol in play at all. But I think that may bias us a little bit.
Which is why I was saying I'd be interested to see though, like how many times has it gone awry? Like how many times has an idol been used to push somebody else out versus the time an idol's been used because they had to, because votes were split on them and they required it to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, Kay, I'm sure you know this.
That would require some number crunching. So that's an ambitious ask, but who knows?
He may just have it,
Yeah.
He may just have it.
To be sure, though, I feel like my gut tells me, it agrees kind of with what I think you're saying, which is that it seems like in the last couple of seasons, people are playing very conservatively with the eye towards splitting the votes rather than risking an idol. And it feels like an overcorrection to me. Right. And it kind of will bite them more often than it saves them.
That's what it feels like. And so here's my armchair sort of survivor. Like if I don't know that I would actually play this way, but this is armchair survivor. I would say that the better play would be to not ever split votes. Just put yourself in a position where you're not going to be the one that's going to get the idol played on them, or not played on them, but you're not going to be the one that the people with the idol choose to vote for. That's probably the better scenario. Mm-hmm. It's easier to do, I think. Just don't be the one that the one person who you're voting for wants to get out of the other 7. And that's where, like, look at and that just reminded me of something else. Like, look at when you're calculating odds, of the odds of splitting 4-3 against 3. And the chance that something could go wrong.
Yeah, it only takes one person to flip.
Right, versus 7-3, and the chance that you might be the one of the 7 that the idol is played on, if the idol is played, if the idol exists. Like, run those numbers.
Yeah, I agree.
Those odds are way better, And that's that. And the reason that I brought that up is because I really loved that and maybe it was because of the blind side, but the reality is they didn't ever even talk about, well, what if Nick has an idol? Does that mess all this up? It's like, roll the dice. Go for it.
I agree. I agree. Now, it may be that since we had Julia and Michelle join the plan, they may have felt like they were close enough to Nick that they would know if he had one or not. No, so I'm just saying that they couldn't have known for sure because he might have just been keeping it a secret, of course. But they might have felt like they were sure enough that it gave them added confidence. But yeah, I agree that they didn't even talk about it, because, well, and at the same time, there was no point in trying to split votes from that end. They didn't have the numbers to do that.
But they did.
They had 5 out of 10 that only worked because the other 5 were split.
No, they had 6 because, well, I guess I'm projecting that they had 6 because Ty wrote Jason's name down.
Yeah.
So it feels like he knew what was going on and just didn't want to participate. Like, I'm not really sure. He had a great episode up until Tribal Council, but we'll.
Yeah, Ty was, yeah. So his vote for Jason is weird. There's one of the Dalton Ross interviews with Nick. I didn't listen to the podcast interview, but it had some excerpts, and one of them was, "What is Nick's theory for that?" And he reveals that there is all sorts of strategic play that we didn't see because it was just kind of all over the place. And the episode is kind of trying to streamline a narrative out of it. But what he's basically saying is this idea that somehow he and Jason and Scott were ever tight was always kind of not quite true, because he was pretty sure they were planning to blindside him at some point before the 7, and that he was perhaps planning to blindside them before they could do it to him, but that wouldn't have been this time. It may have been next time. But so he was kind of doing all of that. And so what he said is that there was also, before they apparently settled on their plan to get rid of him, there was some discussion of this all-girl group getting Jason out instead. And some of the other beauty members, including Ty, were in on that. And then somehow Nick was not 100% sure how it ended up shifting back to being on him, but he knew that there had been discussion, including Ty, of voting out Jason. And so maybe that's what Ty thought was happening when he got flustered.
That makes sense.
That was his theory anyway. Obviously, he can't know for sure either, because he didn't see his own vote getting... He didn't see himself getting voted out.
Right.
But that theory makes sense. And he does just indicate that there's kind of a lot more moving pieces that we're seeing, because a lot of them maybe just don't go anywhere.
Right. Yeah, and what you're speaking to there is part of the reason that Nick sort of elevated it above, neutral for me, is that he definitely gets it more than you first think that he does. Like, he's a lot more savvy than you expect. Like, and so he's smart enough to know all the right things to do. He mishandles himself because of whatever it is, whether it's the arrogance or the narcissism or however you want to define it. He doesn't handle the situation correctly. And that's what makes him different than Scott and Jason, is they have those same tendencies that he does, but they haven't figured the whole thing out the way he has.
Right.
Their arrogance leads them to believe that everyone is thinking like them.
Yeah,
his arrogance leads them to believe is, once I have this figured out, then I can go and do whatever I want because I've got this figured out, and it's their differences, but
Well, I agree. I mean, it's definitely Jason and Scott that have the issue that we've talked about in past episodes, which this idea of they come up with a plan that unfortunately forgets that other people are coming up with their own plans.
Yes.
So they seem to say, "Oh, well, I know. We get this alliance, and everybody says they're on board, so we're just going to do that, right? And maybe we'll decide to change it at some point, but that'll be up to us to decide." And that seems to be how they think about it. Kind of forgetting that other people, just because they told you they're with you, might actually be doing something else. And then when they do, you're shocked and betrayed that they would turn on you, even though you had repeatedly considered doing the same thing to them. And just because they beat you to it, now you're mad. That sort of thing. But Nick definitely, maybe partly just due to his place in the game, was much more proactive of actually talking to people, considering various plans, and understanding that each of them have their own motivations for what they think they might want to do. rather like not everybody is basing their strategy on what's good for Jason and Scott. And Nick is aware that everyone else is playing their own game for themselves and not to support the alliance.
Right.
One of the things that I was thinking about his, like the level of self-awareness that goes along with his arrogance, he strikes me as the kind of guy who he's aware enough where he'll say, yeah, I know I act arrogant a lot of the time, and I'm sure that bothers people sometimes, but it's just that usually I'm awesome enough that I pull it off.
Is that a quote from something, or is that just...
No, I'm just... that's
perfect, yeah.
It strikes me as, who knows, maybe I'm paraphrasing something. I wasn't deliberately paraphrasing any particular line, but it does feel like his attitude about it.
Yes.
So
Johnny Bravo, you know?
Yeah. Where were we? We kind of got way off of the actual chronological discussion, but that's fine. Because we didn't even get to my fifth line of notes, which is Jason talking about his kids, including his autistic daughter.
Yes.
And, both that discussion and then Scott's discussion later about his mom and his family in general, I really appreciated because both of them have been, like, to some extent, one extent or another, have been kind of cartoon villains this season in some ways. So it was kind of nice to have them be a little deeper, humanized a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I like both of those segments. I thought they were good. To just show that, again, they're not bad guys. They're just misunderstanding how this is working. And it makes me, I kind of like them. I don't necessarily know that I'm, like, rooting for one of them to win, but I don't particularly, like, want them to get voted off.
Right.
And the editing in this season has been very good because Nick was the person that I wanted voted off. If you'd asked me at the beginning of the episode, you get to choose who goes to make the show better, I would have said Nick. That guy sucks, And then he went and again raised himself up to where I wasn't like, well, he doesn't suck. He's just interesting, Maybe not interesting enough to keep around, but so. Yeah.
But one of the things that in particular I thought was I resonated for me with Jason was just that dilemma of, like, his daughter being autistic is something that actually really matters to him, and he cares a lot about that issue. And at the same time that he, even separate from the game, wants to kind of promote increased awareness of autism and related issues, especially because he felt like he didn't know anything about it before it impacted him and his family. And so wanting to help talk about it and educate it in that sense, but there also being that element of, plus it'll humanize me to the other people, but I don't want to use it for that reason, like a cynical ploy, like to exploit it. That feels gross. And yet I do want to talk about it, and I know that it will have that effect. So him actually talking through feeling that tension, I thought was really interesting.
Yes.
Luna agrees. So in any case, I thought that was good. And then I also liked Sydney, cutting to a confessional with Sydney where she's basically saying, I liked that moment. It really did humanize him for me. And I think he did it at, a right time, and he handled it well. But it just means that he's more of a threat to me, and so I need to be more wary of that.
Yep.
It's like, it's not. It was almost like the opposite of what he was worried about, which is that he would be seen as exploiting it, whereas she's saying, no, I think he handled it really well, and that indicates that he's a good player that I need to worry about. So that leads us to the reward challenge. The reward challenge. The reward is ice cream, and it's that whole water step platforms thing. And obviously, like in hindsight, the idea that Julia ended up with the two biggest guys, and that presumably allowed them to hold the steps more steady. I mean, I think it's easy in hindsight to say that that was the right decision to make, but I think Aubrey was beating herself up too much for ruining the challenge by making the wrong decision later.
Yeah. This is where, to me, Jeff Probst, why he's so integral to this show, is that he's the one that made that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Aubrey wouldn't have felt that way if Probst didn't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
That wasn't the reason. It's not like their platforms were unsteady. Julia was just better at walking on them than any of them.
Yeah.
So it was Julia's ability that beat them. And was she helped maybe a little because she had taller people? Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but that wasn't the key piece. Like Aubrey, and the thing is, Aubrey, if she wanted to beat herself up for ruining the challenge, it was to try to be the one who was balancing, because she was not good at that.
Right.
And she didn't say that, and that's what made me realize that Jeff had influence on how she felt.
Right.
Because he made the big deal of, she chose these people, and this is this whole strategy, and this was a different strategy, which will be right and which will be wrong.
Right. Especially when it's a schoolyard pick.
Right.
I highly doubt that Julia was up there looking for people and saying, I'm going to cleverly choose a combination of the biggest people and the smallest people because I am a genius.
No,
I'm not trying to insult Julia there, but I highly doubt that this was a carefully orchestrated strategy in selecting her team, to be contrasted with Aubrey somehow not thinking it through by choosing a well-balanced team.
Yeah, like what probably happened was Julia got to pick first, so she picked Scott. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Get Scott in there to, hold the thing up.
Yeah.
And then Aubrey picked somebody
like maybe Jason, because he looks strong.
Because he's strong. Mm-hmm. And then Julia went with the next tallest person, Nick.
Yeah.
And then Aubrey took the next strongest person, which meant that, they were all just mediocre people. And then maybe Julia did say that. Maybe said, okay, we have tall people, but we also have to get on that platform, so I'm going to take the smaller ones. Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Well, it ended up really, I mean, it's just like, So I thought Probst made too big a deal about it, and then she correspondingly made a big deal about it.
Don't you talk bad about Probst.
Hmm?
Don't you talk bad about Probst. No, I'm kidding.
I know. I'm just trying to think what it is. Because I think he was doing his job, which is to try to build a narrative of some kind into the challenge, right?
Good.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think that in this case, he was overstating the idea that the team selection was somehow a strategy that is to either be applauded or condemned.
Yeah.
So in any case, the blue team has a much harder time. Yellow team wins. They dominate the challenge.
They did nothing. They literally did nothing.
Well, it's weird too, just because the nature of that portion of the challenge meant that like Julia was almost at the end, and if she had fallen off there, they would have had to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, it's designed to neutralize.
Yeah.
that's why I say it was Julia's balance, ability, and skill level that was the difference.
Yeah.
Because Julia was able to walk from point A to point B, never falling.
Yeah.
That was more impressive. And that wasn't because she had the too tall and too small. Like it probably helped that she had taller people, but she balanced that. You know, she did that. She didn't have just she wasn't just like skipping along with things. You know, she had to reset herself every time.
Yeah.
So
in any case, the winners were Julia, Debbie, Ty, Scott, and Nick. You know, what we kind of already talked. Aubrey gets really emotional. I think that she's kind of in a rough spot emotionally because her game is not going well at the moment. So, and she also just kind of seems like she's the type to sort of, she's quick to blame herself for anything that goes wrong.
Yes. When I look back at this scene versus the whole of the episode, it's an interesting season because there are a lot of people who are playing very well and very poorly all at the same time, and not necessarily that everybody else can see, that we as the audience can see. So Aubrey's emotion and, you know, bitterness with Neil and, oh, this is just snowballing into this horrible thing and one wrong decision and she put it on like her wrong decision was to like partner with Neil or something. Like she didn't even put it on the challenge. Like she put that snowball like even before, and it's like, Aubrey, you're way out of.
Yeah.
And then to settle down and accept when something was offered to her and drive it forward, did very well. Ty, we see in the next challenge, do well, and then he had his thing, and you know, Nick understands the intricacies of the gameplay, but then doesn't actually play the how do I go and talk to people part correctly. You know, there was just a lot of these ups and downs with everybody, which brought me back to something that I think we talked about several episodes ago, in that, you know, once Caleb was gone, there wasn't really like a hero. There's not something that you really behind. Like, who are we rooting for?
Right. I agree. It still kind of feels that way. Like there's people I like more and people I like less, but like, yeah, I don't have anyone that I really can't stand. But likewise, I also don't have anyone where I'm like, oh yeah, that's my guy or that's my girl and I want them to win. It's kind of like everybody's a little bit more all over the place in this one.
Yeah. And it solidified that I really felt like Caleb, I want him to come back on this and I want him to do well, because I've realized, if I didn't say it at the time, in hindsight, like he was definitely like you said, my guy, because I like Ty, but I don't necessarily say like Ty's my guy. Like he's got his own things going on, but the fact that he had his own things going on, and Caleb, who was so different, and your expectation was going to be that he would dislike Ty, and his bonding with him made me say, yeah, that's the guy. I want that guy to win, you know? And I don't have that now. Like Scott, I like certain things about. Like if Scott won, I wouldn't mind. Jason won, I wouldn't mind. Honestly, when I think about all of the people currently on the season, I don't necessarily mind any of them winning. Like Debbie's weird and not my favorite, but she's weird in like that positive quirkiness, you know?
Yeah, well, she does her own thing. Yeah. She's not like other people, but she also is not trying to be. She's kind of she seems comfortable in her own skin, even as weird as that is.
Yeah, and you'd be like, okay, if she managed to win, you'd be like, all right, good for her. She played her own. She beat to her own drum, did her own thing. I don't think she's going to. But I don't even know how to handicap anybody at this point. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as we come back from that challenge, we have the ice cream, and we have everyone being a little bit subdued, because I think at least a handful of them are sensitive to not wanting to rub it in everybody else's faces. But Jason almost seems to feel like he would rather them actually. It's not clear what he wanted, but I don't know. Maybe just the idea that they would be acting subdued for his benefit rubbed him the wrong way. Like, don't do me any favors, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that it was a weird sort of request. But this is where we had Scott talking about his family, and that was nice too. Julia was talking about having him kind of, being aligned with him, even though ultimately we know now that didn't last. Then we got an interesting conversation, some strategy talk with Nick, Jason, and Scott while Joe snores in the hammock nearby. Just the check of, hey, Joe. Hey, Joe. All right, I think we're good.
Oh, yeah, he's got hearing aids that he forgot.
Yeah. So in any case, what was also funny about that particular strategy discussion is that they were worried about the all-girl alliance before it actually existed. It's almost like they willed it into existence. I mean, seriously, it's almost like they made it happen by worrying about it. Because Sydney, her response to some of that strategizing, especially, she had kind of a weird response, because certainly what we were seeing was Nick, Jason, and Scott talking. And then we see Nick actually kind of going behind their back to go talk to Julia about maybe doing something else. And then Sydney sees some of that and basically jumps to the conclusion that somehow the rest of her alliance is not being honest with her. Which is weird, because that's not quite what happened. And yet, when she confronts Jason about it, he still lies to her.
Yes.
It's kind of a bizarre couple of exchanges. Because the conclusion she jumps to seems non-obvious from what she had just seen. But then Jason lies to her anyway, instead of just telling her the truth, which, at least from what we could tell, was completely innocent. Because when she calls him out, basically, basically the real truth was, hey, we were worried about there being. So I guess it was a little bit more complicated, because they tried to put it on Nick that he was the one that was more worried about the all-girl alliance, and that they weren't. But at the same time, this idea that, if anything, if their concern is that the girls are going to turn against them, you wouldn't want to do anything to imply that you suspect her, right?
Right.
You don't want her to feel like you're bullying her into staying with you. And so I don't know, it was just kind of a weird couple of exchanges, and I feel like I was missing something in that whole sequence. And I suspect that it may be because it just didn't actually make sense, because she was being a little bit irrational in that moment, and her making unexpected accusations kind of rattled everybody a little bit.
Yeah.
But in any case, I think her lingering feelings of paranoia from that whole exchange definitely led to her making the decision that she made later.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Basically being increasingly suspicious of Jason and Scott and feeling like, well, I'm not sure they have my back, so why should I have theirs?
Yeah, and a dislike for Nick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So that's pretty much all we had before we're now up to the immunity challenge. And sure enough, we get confirmation that Nick's immunity was only for last time, and it didn't matter that he didn't need it. Although that's another thing that Dalton Ross asks him about. Like, did you even ask, like, if it could count still again? And basically what he says is, honestly, the whole routine was so disrupted after not having tribal council before that I really didn't even think about it in terms of thinking, like, could I ask for it to work again? And so I just showed up at the challenge and he asked for it back, so I gave it to him. And it was only really later that I realized that maybe I could have tried to push for something.
Well, and we got to give him a little bit of leeway on that because, as Probst pointed out, he hasn't even been to a tribal council.
Yeah. I
think it was him and Julia.
Michelle, I think.
Michelle.
Yeah, him and Michelle.
There were two of them that had not even been yet. So it's to put on him that he should be thinking through all these scenarios that are totally out of line with the game that we can all there. Well, when he hasn't even been to a tribal council, it's like, yeah, whatever.
Well, the other thing, too, it's like we talked about the last time, whether he asked for it or not. I think it's the only fair thing is to do what they did, which is that, you know what, you were going to be immune from that tribal council, and then we didn't end up having it, but now we're reset. We're into the next cycle now.
Yeah.
That's how the game works, you know. You got, you know, it turned out that winning that challenge didn't matter that time, but you still didn't go, so you were still safe. You would have been safe either way.
Right.
But it also just, you know, the idea that he goes out this time just kind of drives home just the weird feeling of.
That was funny.
So, of course, it's one of the endurance challenges, and we're looking forward to the temptations because that's how these challenges work. That's what makes them interesting at this point.
And then temptation. And
then poor Julia, she can't hold on just those last few seconds. I mean, that sucks. And you just sort of feel like, I mean, at a certain point, you know, your body's just going to let go whether you want it to or not. But boy, if you could have just held on just a little bit longer, you get to eat instead of getting to go sit there and then realize and, you know, sit 3 feet away from the food that if you had just held on for 30 more seconds, you could have been eating.
Right.
That had to be the worst. But so in any case, though, the temptation window, and I liked the idea, by the way, of announcing in advance, this will be the only temptation. So it's either this one or nothing. So there's no holding out for a better one or anything like that, or waiting to see who takes the first one and then maybe taking the second one or something like that. Nope, this is it. And everybody's going to step off at once.
I like that.
Yeah, I did too. So Jason, Scott, Joe, Michelle decide to eat, leaving Nick, Ty, Debbie, Aubrey, and Sydney to stay in. Joe is one of the three brains that we would, you know, hope that they're working as hard as they can to stay in the game. But at the same time, you know, he's older. It sounded like everybody sort of just accepted this challenge is just not to his strength. He's not going to be able to compete, so he might as well just eat.
Yep.
But I liked Debbie and Aubrey staying in.
Yeah, it goes back to my point earlier. It's like when you're thinking about the odds, like, okay, yes, you're on the Brains tribe, you're likely to go at some point, but you've got a 1/3 chance. If assuming all 7 of them are going for you, you still have a 33% chance of going. And you have what you feel like is a 0% chance of winning the immunity. Like, which one do you take? Like, take the 2/3 you're going to go, you're going to be able to stay and go eat and live to fight another day, or don't. You know, like, if you're going to be the one that's going to go, what's the point? You know, is you not giving in going to win you any points that keeps you in the game? You know what I mean? Like, if you can't make it to the end, just walk away when you get some. So I'm totally for what Joe did.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But like, by the same token, but to contrast, I liked that Aubrey and Debbie stayed in because they felt like, you know, maybe we can do better. We want to try to do as well as we can. We got to hope that, you know, plus they probably knew, and they were correct, of course, that it was the 2 of them that were really kind of.
Yeah, the reality was it wasn't a 33% chance. It was a 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in any case, once we've got it sort of narrowed down a little bit here, there's some discussion with Ty and Nick where they basically, they straight up just admit what the sort of the numbers situation is. I have mixed feelings about that because on the one hand, you know, it just seems like sort of the hubris of declaring the situation with such confidence like that is, you know, first of all, the arrogance puts people off, as we saw become a problem. Then there's also just the element of definitively making it clear to the people who are in danger that they do need to do something, anything they can, as opposed to any kind of attempt to blindside someone. But on the other hand, too, it's like when something is as solid as that plan seemed to be, at some point it just feels kind of silly to try to pretend that it's not happening.
Right.
You know, it's like when everybody there knows it, that this is not like some secret that somebody is not aware of and, oh no, I'm spilling the beans. It's like, nope, everybody knows it. Even Jeff knows it. I'm just going to say so. So I could see that. So like typically I feel like the people who blurt out too much information like that, I disapprove of. But I think in this case, it was not so bad, except of course, just that his attitude about it ultimately turned allies against him. So there's a mistake there.
Right. Well, because Ty used the same line, but he did it in a different way. Like, it was like, hey, I'm uncomfortable, but we need to be the Brains tribe because that's the plan.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm
working hard to do this. Yeah.
Kind of want to see how far I can go.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff called him out on it later. He was like, hey, you know, all the brains are gone. Why are you still there? And he gave an epic speech. He's like, you know, Sydney, she's strong.
Yeah.
Strong people are strong to a point, and then they break.
Yeah.
She's like redwood, you know, it can snap. I'm like bamboo. I just bend with the wind. Like, it was, like, he didn't say it nearly with that confidence, but it was awesome that he played it. He played the same card that Nick did.
Yeah.
But he played it in a different way. Like, it wasn't the same. It didn't have the same outcome.
Well, right. Yeah. So like we have Ty saying, oh yeah, I want to make sure that one of the brains doesn't get it. And then Probst goes, oh, I'm going to pretend I wasn't aware of this dynamic. So tell me more. and so, but it was kind of this sort of a more sincere, natural expression of what was going on. And then Nick was the one that basically said, "Oh yeah, that's pretty much how it is. You know, we've got 7 against their 3. It's going to be one of them."
And then and where I think the arrogance really drove the point home. You take this whole body of work, and sometimes like there is the actual like literal nail in the coffin for something. And for Nick, it was the last brain stepped down, he kind of looked over, checked everything out, made sure all the brains were gone, and then stepped off, shoulders back, like with confidence. Like,
yep, I'm done. Don't have to do this anymore.
That was kind of shitty. Like, just hang on for like a minute, 2 minutes. Like, just separate your giving in from their failure. Like, just separate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then it's also just...
I think Kai was planning to do, but then all of a sudden he was like, you know what? I kind of want to see if I can do this. Like, I don't think Ty was planning on trying to win. Like, once it got down to him and Sydney, and he kind of looked over, he looked at Sydney, he was there, and he was like, okay, we've done what we came to do. So, well, let me see how long I can go. And because now I'm in a position where if I lose to an ally.
Yeah. Well, you know what it made me think of, and this is super nerdy, but I've been watching and enjoying both the Supergirl TV show and the Flash TV show.
Okay.
Which it's interesting in terms of the various overlapping universes, because while both of those characters are DC, they're on different channels. So while the Flash and Arrow are both on the CW and they're explicitly in the same universe and have had several crossovers, Supergirl's over on ABC, or not ABC, CBS? I can't remember now. It's a different network. I want to say, because ABC is owned by Disney, which I think would be more into Marvel. That's why I'm thinking it's not ABC. Anyway, nobody cares. The point is, it's not the same universe as the Flash and Arrow, but a lot of the same people have kind of been crossing over. Like, writers that were on Flash are now on Supergirl. Same kind of, some of the same producers involved with both shows. And so they worked it out, especially with Flash this season having this whole storyline about being able to travel to parallel dimensions. They worked it out. Let's have Flash guest star on Supergirl. And so it was a delightful episode. And part of what was fun about it is that both of those shows are kind of lighthearted, especially in comparison to, say, the Batman versus Superman movie that's in theaters now, and it's sort of very dark in tone. This one is much more light and funny. And the reason that I got into all of this is just the episode never pits them against each other in any kind of first they have to fight sort of way. They recognize in each other a fellow hero immediately, and then work together and encourage each other in their various difficulties. But then at the end, when it's time for him to go back to his own universe, they realize that part of what has to happen, because this is comic booky stuff and everything about Flash involves him having to go faster, they decide that the way he's able to get back to his own universe is if she's running and like boosting him with her speed, and then he blah, 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 blah. So, but the point is, they both have to run, and they decide at the very last scene, they're going to make it a race. So it's like, Supergirl versus the Flash, but it's this friendly competition. Who's the best? But in a friendly, like, we're both going to like each other either way. And so that's why it made me think of it, just in that sense of they're allies. Neither of them feel like they're in danger, but they both want to just be true to the spirit of the competition.
Right.
And so that's why it was great when, you know, so like Ty finally goes out, Debbie or Sydney goes out, and then Ty is done. But then he like lays down next to her and they're hugging and stuff like that because they're both exhausted and in pain from standing on the thing for so long. And it was a great moment. I really liked it.
It was. Right. And that's what I was ultimately getting at is that like Ty and Nick had the same objective. They handled it very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why Ty was endearing at that moment and Nick felt like kind of a dick.
Yep.
And, you know, that we saw what happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
So in any case, I lost my place in my notes. Okay, here we are. So Ty wins. And then before we go to the commercial, we're reiterating that the plan is that all of the 4 beauty people are going to vote for Aubrey, and then the 3 brawn people are going to vote for Debbie. When we come back, we have Debbie, you know, a good sport, congratulating and applauding both Ty and Sydney for doing a great job. Ty greets the chicken as he returns, continuing that relationship narrative, which I'm enjoying. Noting also that the chicken is not even tied up anymore, does not even have the little string tied to his foot anymore. He's just hanging out at the camp now, which is kind of fun. And then this is where Nick getting proactive. Like, I don't know that he made what happened happen necessarily. With this, but certainly approaching Aubrey with the mindset of, okay, well, my alliance is kind of splitting between these 2, but I know which one I would rather have stay a little bit longer. So maybe if I drop Aubrey the hint, she'll be able to turn it so that Debbie goes home instead of Aubrey. And so, but he handles it. This is where I was actually feeling almost a little charmed by him, even after sort of his arrogance before, but just this idea of like, I'm helping you out, but I didn't tell you anything, right? You know, I'm just saying, you know, that like, if you happened to vote this way, that might change the totals. And I don't know. I found that part a little bit more endearing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the meantime, Sydney is walking around with a chip on her shoulder and a straw lid hat on her head, which I loved. That thing was great. And so in any case, she doesn't like his arrogance. She's seeing him talking to everybody all over the place. It's like, what is he doing? I don't like him. Let's get rid of him. So she goes to Debbie and Aubrey, and instead of trying to pit them against each other, is saying, guys, let's get rid of Nick. And so in the meantime, she takes an aggressive move, which I appreciated, in also lobbying Julia and Michelle, because Julia and Michelle are Nick's former beauty tribe mates. That's a dangerous move to offer that to them, because they might just turn around, tell Nick what she said, and then she's now in the doghouse. But I think they were swayed by her colorful description of Nick being extremely up Jason and Scott's butt.
Well, and it was solidified when Ty had his little mishap at Tribal Council.
Yes. Oh my God.
That drove home the point for Julia.
Yeah. Oh,
and
man.
They made sure, and Jeff made sure.
It was so funny. It was just so like custom designed to just completely cut the legs out from under everything Jason and Scott had just been saying.
Yeah.
It was so good.
So good.
And poor Ty, because he just like, he only sort of belatedly realized what he had done. And the problem is he knew about it, and it's really only because he is in the inner circle and is trusting enough that he just assumed they had told everybody else too.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even know it was supposed to be a secret. You told me.
But
well, no, I take it back. They didn't tell him.
He has an idol.
Because he has the idol. So he knows about it. But I think, so, yeah.
Yeah, so he's had conversations about how the idol works.
Yeah.
He has an idol, so he knows it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just didn't enter into his mind that everybody didn't understand how all that worked. Mm-hmm. And he was so, oh my God, I just said something so stupid and put my foot in my mouth, but handled it as best as he possibly could.
Right. Yeah. Just kind of that sort of sheepish of, I thought everybody knew that already. And then in the meantime, we have Jason and Scott going,
yeah.
What just happened?
Well, I feel like they're going
on and on about how strong our 7 was, and we're so tight, and nothing's going to break us. We've got this whole plan. We know that we're going to get out those 3, and we're going to be down a strong 7 and battle it out from there. That's our whole approach.
Super idols.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, 2 of them go,
what?
A super idol?
What are you talking about?
Yeah. And it's like, oh,
that I thought extremely interesting, powerful wrinkle to the game that you knew and didn't tell us about?
Yeah.
Oh, we're clearly such a strong alliance.
Right. Which gets back into, was Sydney's decision so bad? You know?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I like Sydney's decision because I think she is smart, and I think that this is the right time for her to separate herself from Scott and Jason, because I think that there is going to be a tendency, fair or not, with the 3 bronze sticking together for her to be number 3 in that equation. You know what I mean? And so I think if she doesn't want to be there at the end with those 2 guys, then she needs to separate herself from them sooner than that. And she also is aware that she needs to make big moves that are going to distinguish her, regardless of who she ends up at the end with. And so I think she recognized that now is the right time to make her move, and I think she did. Now, she's obviously going to have to keep it up. You know, you can't just make one big move and then coast for the rest of the game. But
no,
I think she made the right move.
she did exactly the right thing for right now. You know, this was the opportunity when you could actually go recruit that all-girls alliance outside of the fact, because these girls are smarter than, oh, we're all girls, so we should be together. Like, which I feel like is put upon the all-girls alliance a lot of the time. Like, oh, like, there's some reason that, like, because you're girls and guys, you should do this.
Yeah.
No, this was the right reason, because, you know, Sydney, like you said, is on the Braun tribe, number 3 out of 3. Then Julia is clearly not in the mix at all with the beauty tribe. Aubrey and Debbie are on the outs and looking for anything they can right now. And then you put Amanda, Michelle. She's in the same position as Sydney, so they can talk more like, hey, we could go with what they're doing, and we're good right now. But long term, is that really what we want to do?
Right.
Like, so this whole thing made sense for all of them outside of just being all girls.
Yeah.
And yeah, that can be the rallying cry, which is great. You need that sort of brand behind it.
Well, yeah. And again, it's so funny that it's like Jason and Scott willed it into existence, because like there's actual discussion about being worried about it and mentioning that concern to Sydney, and then also making it very clear that the two brains that we're choosing between are Aubrey and Debbie, because we have to make sure that it's a girl that goes home so that the girls don't have an advantage. It's like,
Okay,
all of a sudden the girls are like,
well, I guess we couldn't have
hey, that's maybe not a bad idea. Let's go do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it still only worked because the other half, because they only had 5 votes, but because the other 5 were split, it worked out. And that's not even counting Ty's bizarre Jason vote.
Right, sort of. Yeah, exactly. Like Ty's vote sort of negated that, but let's assume he had voted.
But even the other 5 votes, there was 2 for Aubrey and 1 for Debbie.
That's 3.
Yeah. So hang on, I had this pulled up. Anyway, yeah, so maybe I'm misremembering the numbers because I only wrote down the ones that they read. But, okay, so I'm going to have this up in a second. I don't know why I closed it before in the first place. Okay, so, okay, you were right. There were a total of 6 votes for Nick. There were Michelle, Julia, Joe, Debbie, Sydney, Aubrey.
Right.
So the 5 girls plus Joe. So you're right there.
Right. So that was my point earlier, is that they could have had discussion about, they could have erred the other way and like looked at splitting votes, because they ended up with the 7 if you count Ty, who didn't exactly know what was going on, but clearly knew that the other plan wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was 7-3 the other way, but they didn't, with the whole like, oh, we should get Nick. We need to get enough people to split the votes. No, it's like, we want Nick, go for Nick. And if it doesn't work, then all right, well, somebody else was going to go home anyway, you know? Mm-hmm. And I like that. And that's, again, like I said, I'm armchairing this, like what I actually play. But I would like to believe that if I went on Survivor right now, that I would say, fuck these idols. Like, no, we go all in. So there's none of the bullshit like splitting votes and, oh, you're going to do this, this, and this. No, you get people to agree, align, and go. And if, you know what, the dice roll up where you were the one person that the 3 out of the 7 didn't like, well, that was your own problem.
Mm-hmm.
You had 6 people to be more likable then, and you didn't do it. That's how I see it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the only other note that I had from Tribal Council that I wanted to mention was just how pleased I was with Aubrey's description of running around talking to everybody like Cochrane's dream girl. Just like, all right, yeah, okay. And then I also liked, though, that, you know, she's playing it cool with the real plan by implying that nobody in the 7 was willing to talk to her, which we know is not true on a couple of levels. Not only does she have the actual plan that's moving forward, but we also had Nick that approached her, and yeah. So it was not even just the one alternate plan in play.
Right. To my point, it's like Aubrey was in such a low place and then was able to capitalize and surf that wave.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Nick was in a high place and could not surf that wave.
Yeah.
Ty was in a high place, could not surf that wave.
Right.
You know, they're all over the place. To the point, like, this is sort of an off the cuff thing, but I was like, if I had to pick a winner right now, not from a statistical, but from like who I want to win.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about that earlier today, and I was like, bizarrely, it's Julia. Like, because I feel like everybody else has had these whole rides, and she's sort of been doing, she had to go to it wasn't Exile Island, but like she had that whole thing. She recovered from it. She's been in a position where, she could be a lot of different things, and she's made good choices. She seems generally positive. Like, it's not a strong feeling, but it's like, I feel like that would, and she doesn't seem like a winner. Like, I feel like that would be fun. Like, if she made it to the end and was able to make a case for herself, like, I would love that.
Yeah.
Not last probably, but that's
my only hesitation there is that I feel like she hasn't been proactive enough to be able for us to tell for sure if she's been playing, doing well because she's really like thinking about it and she's being thoughtful and she's making good choices, or whether she's really kind of just coasting along and has been lucky. We haven't really seen her have to make big, hard decisions yet.
Oh, yeah.
With the exception that in this case, she and Michelle together decide to go with Sydney's plan. I mean, there's that, but that's not really her move.
Oh, yeah, totally agree. And that's what you're saying is more of what I'm trying to get at with this season is that, like, there's not a real favorite. So it's like you just kind of pick somebody that you like.
Yeah.
Right now. Like, sure, Julia seems really cool, and she's had to go through some stuff, and she's made a couple of, she's navigated some things properly. So yeah, I kind of like her. But that isn't me like, oh yeah, Julia's done the best job. Like, no, by no means do I feel that way. But that's kind of how this season is. Is that there's not really anybody where you look at them and go, God damn, they did an awesome job. Like, that's the person.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, probably the two people who might have gotten us that feeling both had to leave for medical reasons. Caleb and Neil. Those were the two guys that I really felt like I could have, as I watched it go along, like I wasn't at that point yet, but I felt like had they continued on their trajectories, I would have said, yes, you are doing an awesome job, and I want you to win, But both.
So anyway, next time, Jason and Scott decide to seek vengeance by burying the hatchet, or whatever. They're going to go hide it or something. We've certainly seen people, just like, oh, I'm going to burn the camp down or something like that when they're feeling like they've been screwed over and they have nothing left. But like Jason and Scott are not in that situation yet. It is not that dire.
And my guess is it doesn't actually come out that dire, that they are venting to each other in a normal situation, and they're just saying like, oh, we could do this, and that nothing happens. Like, that happens all the time. Like,
yeah. I feel like if something really exciting were happening, they would have been able to show us more than that, and would have shown us more than that.
Right. It feels like, this happens to me, and it probably happens to you at work where, well, maybe you don't get quizzed about it like I do, but, somebody say, oh, well, that decision that was made, is there a lot of, can you tell me, you kind of have the ear of the troops, or is there a lot of rumbling about it? And it's like, there was, but it was all mostly just like venting. Like people made a lot of jokes and did a lot of this, but they're all just going about their jobs. That's what this feels like. Like, oh, this thing happened, so we're gonna get all huffy about it, and then, all right, well, you know what? We have to actually go do what we're supposed to do. So we're gonna go do that, and we had our little bitch fest, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's what that preview felt like.
I agree. I think that's what it'll amount to.
Yeah.
Now, that said, they are certainly in a dramatically less strong position than they thought themselves to be in.
Yes.
So that's certainly true. I think that probably people in the best spot moving forward are probably Sydney, Michelle, and Julia, I think, are probably at the top of the heap right now. Sydney has chosen a difficult path for herself, but needed to in order to potentially end up the winner. So we'll see how she manages to walk that path. Ty is going to have to figure out what he's up to. We'll have to see if Jason and Scott decide to be mad at him for that. I think that would be a terrible mistake on their part. They can certainly be disappointed that his slip up caused that, but nobody else is going to be their ally right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. We'll see. And then Joe's this cipher off doing whatever he's doing. I mean, he was in on the plan here, but actually, what that just reminds me, I think one of the things that Nick had said in terms of his speculation of what might have happened is that maybe there was a plan to do Nick, and then it was going to change to Jason, but then they decided not to change it to Jason because Joe was already planning to vote for Nick, and they didn't want to confuse him. Like somehow Joe, the retired FBI guy, is too dumb to realize that he should change his vote from one thing to another. Although it's also true he has.
That's what happened last episode.
That's true. That's true.
Joe was adamantly refusing to change his vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe it's not like he's too dumb to figure it out. It's more a matter of we don't want to do that to him again because he gets mad when we do that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in any case, bye-bye, Nick. And then there were 9.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
which is to cap it off, like I agree with your point that the way it happened, Sydney, Michelle, and Julia are on the top.
Mm-hmm.
But there were only 3
of
9. Which is why I say, like, when the question from the YouTuber is asked, do we think Sydney made the right decision? Absolutely, 100% yes. But will it work for her? To be determined, because there's a lot to work with left. Like, she pulled this move very early. I feel like it's the right time for it. You feel like it's the right time for it. Mm-hmm. But it's still very early.
Still a lot of work to do.
A lot of people left and a lot of game left. So that's all TBD.
Yeah. I think their number one step right now needs to be making sure that the 3 Brain Tribe members, Aubrey, Debbie, and Joe, stay on their side for now. Get a couple more eliminations under their belt before they try to mix that up any further.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we will see. And I hope that doesn't produce Ty going out anytime soon, because I think he, like, almost out of everybody, just based on him being entertaining TV, he's the person that I would least want to see eliminated. Not because I'm necessarily rooting for him to win. I like him, but I don't necessarily think he deserves to win. But I do like watching him on the show.
Right. But here's the quick flip side to that is that both Ty and Julia have expressed how much they want to be on Scott's side.
True.
So now you have a different set of 3 over here that while Julia and Ty aren't going to do anything to hinder their game, there's something to work with there. Like, all of a sudden, like, it's not really just because they came out on top this last vote, it doesn't mean that there aren't other things going on. Like, it's going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it may turn out like that. It may it may have flipped and they'll pick off the brawn, I guess, but we'll see.
No more stuffing nerds in lockers, at least not for now. But in any case, I think that probably does it for this episode.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. And remember, you can find podcast notes at christianaellis.com, or you can leave comments on the YouTube page, just like whatever 2025 did. And that was actually the username, not me trying to remember it.
Whatever 2025. Yeah. No,
yeah. So in any case, the whatever 2025. Don't want to get it wrong. But yes, so thank you. We enjoy feedback, and we'll be back for the next episode of Survivor next week.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.